My name is Mara Ellison, forensic pathologist at St. Florian Medical Center, a mid-sized hospital stitched into the old brick of a Virginia river town. The Autopsy Theater sits 3 floors below the street, a bright white room with one stubborn ceiling vent in the southwest corner that sighs like a person who has made their peace with bad weather. The tile is scrubbed to a shine that keeps its own light. The drains remember every case. The smell is saline, lemon cleaner, old steel. I am not a believer. I don't mean religion. I mean anything that can't be checked twice and signed. I believe in weights on scales, in the slow patience of a microscope, in the mercy of simple causes. I don't believe in omens. I didn't, anyway, until the vent began to sing. It started as a rumor the housekeeping crew told each other over coffee at 2 a.m. The angel in B, a day tech said, smiling like a dare. I ignored it. Rooms take on personalities the way people take on pets. It calms us to name what we can't control. The first time I heard it, I was alone. I was dictating a bland report on a man who died in his recliner with the TV reflecting in his glasses. A tidy death, a heart that had done enough. The theater was steady warm. The air handler thrummed its small constant. Then the vent in the corner breathed a draft I could feel on the back of my neck and let out 3 thin notes, rising, each a little higher than the last, like a whistle a child might make trying to call a dog, except tender. A brief silence followed, the sort you could pour into a cup. My pager bellowed a second later, code blue ICU. Coincidence, I thought. Buildings cough. Air slips where it shouldn't. I ended the case, washed, wrote my numbers, walked upstairs. The ICU doors were propped with a gloved hand. Nurses moved at that quick, even speed they use when panic is expensive. The man on the bed was not my man. He was young enough to make the floor tilt. They brought him back and did not bring him back. Both, the way this place teaches you to understand 2 opposing truths at once. 3 nights later, I heard it again. A soft draft, then 3 ascending notes, then a spun glass. Code blue, emergency. I stood with my gloves halfway on, hands paused in the air. The sound had arrived from the same corner, had tapped the same part of me that a bell does in a small empty church. I did not tell anyone. Not because I feared being ridiculous. Morgue staff burn through that fuel quickly, but because some things shrink if you keep them in your chest. The 3rd time, I wrote the time down. 1:17. 3 rising notes from the vent. Code blue, NICU 6 seconds later. I felt the number sitting there, 6, like a bead under a tongue. I put my stethoscope on the metal grill and heard nothing but a faint hiss like a faraway storm. By the end of that week, I had 6 entries in the margin of my blotter, pencil smudged. 1:17, Bensong, NICU, 3:02, Bensong, 5 West, 2344, Bensong, ED. The longest gap was a minute. The shortest was the length of a breath. All week the hospital moved forward like a patient teaching themselves to walk after a fall, cautious, stubborn, proud to be upright. Jules, my night tech, is not a talker. She can go an entire shift without producing more than a few words and still be the person each nurse finds at the counter when they need a favor. She is 28, with hair she keeps in a tight knot and a habit of putting her left hand flat on a surface before she works the right. She knows the theater better than I do. It is her kitchen. 2 weeks into the angel vent, we stood side by side, gloving. The noise came 3 notes, ascending, a breath of warmth across the backs of our necks, and I watched her not flinch. You hear that? I asked, too casual. Hear what? She said, snapping the second glove home. From the vent. The squeak? Filter rattles sometimes, she said, and handed me the scalpel. On the wall, the clock ticked its round face forward. My pager went off. Code blue. Surgical step down. She kept her eyes on the patient chart. If she heard the pager, she did not show it. The noise always found me alone in that room. It never came when I brought someone back to listen, though every pair of ears I borrowed looked toward the corner reflexively when the air shifted, the way we all track a draft we don't understand. The noise never recorded. I put my phone on the counter and let it run while I worked through 2 bodies, and when I listened back later, all I heard was the whisper and click of my own work. When I fed the audio into a free program that makes spectrograms a heat map of sound, the background hiss had shape to it, faint, like fingerprints blurred. And in the band where the notes should have sung, the noise had drawn 2 spread curves, overlapping, pointed at the ends, a child's idea of wings. Artifact, the biomed engineer said, when I brought him the file and let him tell me I was wrong. You're seeing what you want to see. I didn't want to see anything, I said. He squinted like a man who had lost the thread of a story before he began and didn't want to offend the teller. Then harmonics, he offered. I can have facilities check the damper blade. Sometimes an edge whistles. 3 notes, I said. Ascending. He nodded the way people nod at a cranky refrigerator. Air sings if you give it a throat. I didn't know what to do with relief and dread braided together, so I did what I always do, my job. I worked. I wrote. I showed up. The sound continued, 1 level down in my hearing, like an appliance you only notice when it stops. 3 notes rising, a draft that smelled faintly of rain and hot dust, a code blue somewhere above me inside the hospital's square lungs. I started to anticipate it. That is the truest thing I can say. I'd be halfway to a Y incision and the vent would breathe across my neck, and I would rest the blade against the skin and wait for the 3 notes to lift. When they did, I paused a second because I had to, the way men take off their hats when an old song plays, and then the pager would voice its order, and a nurse would run, and the elevators would chase the clock. It did not make me gentle. It did not make me cruel. It did not make me anything except a witness with a stopwatch and a growing collection of coincidence. The first time a family member came down to the basement to identify a loved one while the vent sang, I watched her nostrils flare, the way she brought her hand up to touch her throat as if something had tickled inside. She did not mention it. She mispronounced my name and smiled at me like I was both priest and butcher, which is close enough to the truth. We took deliveries. We released the dead. I made lists I didn't need. I kept the not hearing to myself. When the sound stopped, the hospital went silent. It was a Sunday morning, late in March, when even the light seems unsure of what it's trying to be. I stood with the theater empty, waiting for a scheduled case that had not yet arrived. No draft curled at my neck. The vent did not breathe. The corner kept its quiet. It was the kind of quiet that makes rooms feel as if they are listening and don't want to interrupt. A day passed, then another. 3, 4. The ICU ran without alarms. The ER kept its minor catastrophes in line. No code blues. Not one. At first the silence felt like grace. The hospital loosened its shoulders. Nurses smiled the way people smile when a spell breaks. The cafeteria line moved at a human speed. I caught myself humming. Jules played music under her breath, something with a church cadence, a song that marches up hills and down again. On day 5, relief turned into something else. The ICU began to fill, not with codes, but with patients who lingered at the hem of the same hour without stepping through it. Old women who had outlived all their earrings and all their sisters lay with eyes open and watched televisions with the sound off. A teenager with a brain that had taken 1 too many blows stared out the window at the river and moved his right hand in the air, the way a person taps a fogged pane. She should have gone by now, a nurse said, soft like a secret. He should have gone by now, said another at the opposite end of the building on the same day, about a man whose blood chemistry had emptied every pocket of meaning. On day 6, families grew tight around their chairs. Chaplains did a strange business, not pressing, not giving up. Our overflow closets filled with bags no one would carry out. The morgue stayed empty. My work shrank to paperwork and waiting. If you do this job long enough, you learn that no work is not the same as good news. It is an ache in the hands. It is a pressure in the teeth. It is a hospital holding its breath. On day 7, administration sent out an email with a subject line that used the word remarkable and the body that used the word unprecedented and 6 bullet points, most of which asked staff to be mindful of resources and to rest. People copied it and sent it to their parents. I went downstairs and stood under the vent and asked a very small, foolish question into the quiet. Where did you go? Nothing. The corner stayed a corner. The room held its breath and let it go. I told myself it had always been an edge whistle on a fan blade, and this was how the world behaves when the fan blade is fixed. I told myself I did not want the sound back. I told myself a hospital without codes was the dream we all kept folded in our locker behind the spare scrubs. I did not sleep much. Halfway through that week without songs, I walked past the chapel and saw the chaplain, Father Thomas, the kind who wears his collar like it's a wrench he forgot to put down, sitting in the front pew with his head bent and his hands open the way men cup water. I hadn't eaten in a dozen hours. I had not been to church in 20 years. I slid into the back pew and stared at the little red candle that always burns in the corner as if God were a person you could keep from losing their way with a nightlight. "You look like you're trying to listen through a wall," he said without turning. He has a voice that sounds like it used to be a singer and decided to retire into weather. "Your business is booming," I said. It was meant to land as a joke. It did not. "It's quiet," he said. "That's my word," I said. He nodded. "Do you hear it?" "What?" "The quiet," he said, smiling without showing teeth. "Everyone hears noise. Very few hear quiet." "I hear vents," I said, reflexively defensive. "Then you hear prayer," he said, and I stood, because my lungs did not want to share the same air with that sentence. He raised a palm, not a blessing, a truce. "We are one building with many jobs," he said. "We have to share certain words. It's inconvenient." In the elevator back down, I could feel the absence of the song like I'd left the house without my keys. The elevator doors wanted to close before I had decided to be inside them. My reflection looked like a person who had missed a joke and will never hear it again. I lasted 2 more days before I did something I am not proud of. Facilities had come once, months before, when I'd complained about a rattle. They'd pulled the drop ceiling tiles like cards and climbed into the space above with their flashlights and their size. I remembered how easily the tile lifted. I remembered the way the silver duct flexed like a throat. I remembered the little manual damper blade, the kind you can turn by hand if you are the sort of person who believes in fixing things with fingertips and stubbornness. Jules had gone to the loading dock to sign for a delivery. The theater was empty. I rolled the step stool under the vent and pushed the tile up and to the side. Warm dust breathed out, the smell of paper and summers you don't remember correctly. I hauled myself up into the crawl space with a gracelessness that made my ribs complain. The duct lay above me like a silver path. The damper arm was folk engineered at some point in the past. Someone had bent it to 90 degrees so it would not rattle against the grill. I took my gloved fingertips and turned it a little. The duct coughed a small puff of air in my face as if clearing its throat. I turned the arm a little more until the edge of the blade lined up with the path the air wanted. Then I waited, up there with dust in my teeth, feeling stupid and stubborn, and also like I had finally put my hand where it had wanted to go for weeks. Nothing. The duct breathed. The building held. The room below me did not sing. Jules came back and looked at me through the one open tile, a human face in a tile sky. She did not ask a question. She has the gift of letting other people be ridiculous without making them defend the choice. "You stuck," she said. "Just looking," I said. "Careful with the tiles." "They bite," she said, and went to the sink to wash her hands, murmuring something I recognized as a hymn before she swallowed the last notes and let the sink run loud. I climbed down awkwardly, put the tile back, and told myself that if the song had been an edge whistle all along, I had just changed its mouth enough to stop it. I told myself I had solved a problem. I told myself that the silence was a version of mercy, and the fact that it felt like a threat was my problem, not the buildings. On the 8th night, a nurse from the NICU came down to the morgue to sit in the empty chairs along the wall. She was young, hair in a braid, wedding ring tanned into her skin. She sat like someone who had forgotten which parts of a body move and which don't. After a minute, she looked at me, half a room away, and said, "We're keeping a little boy alive because no one is dying." I started, and she cut me a look that said, "Don't be an idiot on purpose." "We trade," she said. "Beds, fence, time, rooms. We trade. When one end stops, the other end clogs. He needs a vent. Nobody is coming off. We don't pronounce anybody. No codes. Everybody just stays." They told the parents maybe tomorrow. They have been told maybe tomorrow for 6 days. They say thank you like it's hurting them. I looked at her hands. They were the clean hands of someone who has washed 15 times in one day. I imagined the little boy's chest, the way the ribs can go flat and then lift and then flatten again when a machine makes the motion, the way that motion can convince you it is breathing. "I don't know how to help you," I said. "You hear the building," she said. "Somebody told me. The tech upstairs hears the pipes. Father Thomas hears the chapel. You hear the basement." I thought I'd try the basement. "I hear vents," I said, and this time I did not want to be right. She nodded in a way that makes the world pull in its shoulders and said, "I'll sit a while." She sat until her pager told her to move, then stood, smoothed the front of her scrubs in the ritual we all learn, and walked out like she could not make it all the way, and then she did. That night, 3 a.m, something in me gave up being clever. I pulled the step stool out. I lifted the tile. I leaned into the dark above the room. I turned the damper blade back the way I had found it. I turned it a little farther, the way people do when they do not trust the original angle. Air pushed past my face with a gentle insistence, like a person telling you to hush without meaning offense. I waited. The duct breathed. The crawl space smelled like old heat. A draft curled around my neck. The vent exhaled 3 notes, rising thin, alive. The room received them like a bowl does a pour. I did not move. I counted 1, 2, 3 heartbeats, 6, 12. My pager spoke. Code blue, NICU. I climbed down hard enough to bruise my shins and ran. The elevators were busy. I took the stairwell 2 floors and arrived behind a resident with a face like a boy at a funeral. The NICU is its own planet, lights softened like mother's hands, machines singing their soft, constant lullabies. The little boy's parents stood pressed to the glass of the isolette, their foreheads touching. The charge nurse looked at me and then away like I was wind. The code had already decided. It moved at a pace that made time feel like a thing you could chew. It ended the way all of them end, with a decision in the hands of a person who had wanted to be in charge of other decisions and learned too late what comes with it. Later, the nurse with the wedding ring sat on the floor in the hallway, legs out, hands in her lap like she was waiting to be told she could stand. I wanted to apologize. I wanted to confess. I wanted to demand that someone else say what I knew, that a sound had come and then a child had gone. She looked up at me like a person waking and said, "We released a vent." The parents held him. We released a vent. That is a way of telling the truth. After that, the song returned, not constant, not even frequent. Enough. 3 notes ascending, a breath across the neck. Code blue nearby or far. I did not climb again. I did not try to tune it. I did not tell Biomed. I did not tell Father Thomas. I wrote down the times in my blotter until the pencil smeared into a small gray thumbprint and then stopped because the record made it worse. One afternoon, Father Thomas came to the theater with something wrapped in gauze and taped like a gift no one knew how to present. He placed it on the counter. It was a vent grill, not ours, an older model, crusted with the sort of paint that accumulates over decades of someone else's decisions. From the chapel, he said. They're renovating. The contractor said this one thing. He smiled at that last word as if it embarrassed him. I thought maybe you'd want. I don't know what I thought. I don't collect, I said. He nodded. Me neither. He unwrapped it anyway, and the metal blinked in our bright light. It had a small notch along one edge where someone had bent a fin. We spend a lot of time explaining a mercy we don't control, he said. I don't like that as a job description. What do you call it instead? I asked. Being here, he said. He left the grill on the counter like it would know what to do next. I set it under the vent in the corner, a small offering to an absurd idea, and stood back with my hands behind my back like a child in a museum taught not to touch. Nothing happened, of course. Rooms are not gears. Still, the square of old metal under the square of living air made the corner look like a mouth with a set of long-ago teeth. Jules stepped around it as if it were hot. The spectrogram I had printed months ago, the one that looked like wings, sat folded in my desk. I took it out and looked at it in the light. The shape was faint, barely there, two overlapping curves, rising, pointed at the ends. If you believed in pictures that made promises, you could say the lines leaned toward each other like wrists crossed in prayer. I tucked the paper back into the drawer and told myself to be less dramatic. I did not throw it away. Word spread anyway. Leaks in buildings are generous. They share themselves. The angel vent, a security guard said, smiling. The signal, a respirator therapist called it, sharp, annoyed, frightened. The whistle, said a nurse who had lost 3 in 1 month and found relief in the uglier word. The notes, said a resident who didn't yet know what to be afraid of. Do you hear it? People asked me when they wanted me to say no, to make it small. Sometimes I said, which was true and not enough. People began to look at the corner of rooms when the pages went out. They did it privately, like people crossing themselves after 40 years without it. Someone put a small paper angel on the theater wall as a joke. Jules took it down without comment and folded it into a square and put it in the pocket of her scrubs, and we never spoke about it. There were days when the sound came and no code followed. Those were the worst. I would stand there with the notes in my bones and wait for the pager to bark, and the hospital would keep moving as if nothing had pulsed. The false alarms taught me the obvious thing I already knew and had refused to let into my mouth. The song did not cause the codes. It announced them. Like thunder after lightning you don't see. Like wind under a door. A month later, the vent sang at noon. 3 notes, higher than usual, a breath on the back of my neck like a person too close. I looked at the clock. It is possible, when you do this job, to know where sound goes. I knew where those notes went. Upstairs to a recovery room where a woman with a new scar under her bra line would look out the window and see a tree shake and think it was wind. Into the ED where a boy with a bicycle chain print on his calf would argue about pain scales. Into the cafeteria where a sandwich dryer ran too hot. No page came, no code. The elevator did not open on a crashed cart. I stood under the grill until my neck prickled with embarrassment and a little anger. Then what, I said aloud to metal, do you want? The vent breathed. I breathed. The room held us both and did not decide. I went back to work. You want me to say what it was? That is the kind of comfort we give each other when stories involve hospitals, a name, a defect, a wiring fault, a person who makes sense to blame. I can give you a few polite possibilities. The damper blade had a bent edge that whistled when the building's air moved a certain way. The Autopsy theater existed at the end of a long run of ductwork that amplified harmonics. The pressure differentials between the cooler and the theater matched elevator cycles. I could give you 3 paragraphs of a theory, and we could both sleep badly afterward with the wrong kind of relief. Or I can tell you the other thing. The thing I will claim with a straight face and an oath in a courtroom if I have to. There is a sound, and it comes before the end. The sound is not an ending. It is a hand on a door. It is a breath. It is a line sung by no one you can see in a room where we make practical use of what we can't keep. Weeks after the week of silence, I was in the theater late, finishing a case I had put off because I wanted to eat dinner like a civilian for once. I closed, cleaned, sat at the desk with my chart and the clock and the empty chair beside me that sometimes holds Father Thomas when he is too tired to stand. The vent exhaled. 3 notes rose like a person climbing stairs they know by heart. I waited. No page, no code, no footsteps above. The room remained a room. I went to the sink and washed my hands the way I always do, palms and backs, fingers and thumbs. Then I turned off the water and stood without paper, letting the drip collect in the metal throat and fall. I looked at the corner. I could hear my breath. I thought of the boy in the NICU whose parents had been forced to carry 2 truths like matching boxes and how gently they had done it. I thought of the nurse with her tan ring and the way people sit when they cannot yet stand up. I thought of the little wing shape on my printout that I had kept when any sane person would have thrown it away. I thought of the week the sound had gone and how the hospital had grown too full of people who needed to be allowed to leave, and how the kindness we wanted had become a cruelty. "I am here," I said. I said it like you might say it to a child in the next room who calls your name in the night to see if you are awake. I did not say anything else. I am not in the business of telling air what to do. The notes did not repeat. The pager did not call me. I dried my hands and sat and wrote. It is, I know, a disappointing story. No wing fell from the vent. No miracle turned a knife to a flower. The song came back when it wanted to. The building breathed. People died. People didn't. The world did what it does. Here is the part one have not told anyone, not even Jules, and it is a small thing, so small it barely deserves to be a confession. 2 months after the silence, I woke at home to the sound of 3 notes, soft as if the vent had learned a way to be gentle with me while I slept. I lay there with my hands on my chest and felt my own ribs lift and fall, and when the notes were gone I waited for the pager's bark and then remembered there is no pager in my house. No code, no elevator, just the house and the old heater and my breath. I went to work early and found the day as ordinary assault. The sound has preceded deaths that were a mercy and deaths that gutted the room and left it raw. It has preceded nothing at all. It does not care about glory. It does not make itself into a god because people in buildings are hungry for gods. It is a draft-turned instrument by a blade of metal with a history and a mouth. Father Thomas's old vent grill sits in the corner of my office, leaning against the wall like a friend who stays without asking for a chair. Sometimes when I am finishing a report late, I swear the fin catches the light in a way that looks like motion. Sometimes when the song comes, I see in my mind the spectrogram curves like wrists crossed in prayer. Sometimes when the song doesn't come and the pager yells anyway, I feel cheated in a way I'm ashamed to admit, as if the universe has broken a rule it never agreed to follow. I am not a believer. I am a person in a white room with a drain and a clock doing a job that requires a steady hand and a high tolerance for unsolved mysteries. The vent sings. The hospital answers. If there is goodness in it, it is not the goodness of fortune-telling. It is the goodness of a warning sung by no one and everyone, a kindness that arrives too late to prevent anything and just in time to make you square your shoulders and put your hand where it belongs. When the notes come now, I don't look at the clock. I put down what I am holding. I listen. I let the draft touch the back of my neck. I think of the boy in the NICU and the young nurse and the breathing that is not breathing and the way the building learned to be quiet and then learned to be a voice again. I tell the room what I can, which is not quite a prayer and not far from one. I am here, I say to the corner, to the air, to the names upstairs and the ones who will come downstairs and the ones who won't. I am here. And outside, in the long, bright hall where the elevators open like held breath, the world continues doing what it does whether or not anyone sings, whether or not anyone hears.